Royalty, imagine walking into a jewelry boutique. Behind the glass are diamonds, emeralds, rubies, and watches. Some pieces cost thousands of dollars. Others can cost hundreds of thousands. And then there is a name that has been associated with royalty, aristocracy, celebrities, and some of the most important jewelry collections in history. Cartier. But here's the question. How does a jewelry house become the jeweler of kings? Because being wealthy isn't enough. A royal court doesn't simply need someone who can sell expensive jewelry. It needs someone who understands power, tradition, symbolism, and taste. And Cartier became extraordinarily good at all four. The story begins in Paris in 1847, when Louis-François Cartier took over the workshop of his master, Adolphe Picard. Over the following decades, the business expanded through the Cartier family, eventually establishing important operations in Paris, London, and New York. But Cartier's rise wasn't simply about making beautiful jewelry. It was about understanding something deeper. Jewelry is never just jewelry. A necklace can represent power. A tiara can represent lineage. A diamond can represent wealth. A ring can represent love. And a carefully chosen jewel can communicate all of these things without saying a single word. Cartier learned how to speak that language, and eventually royalty started listening. In 19th century Paris, luxury was changing. The European aristocracy had an enormous appetite for jewelry, watches, and decorative objects, but the world itself was changing too. Travel was becoming faster. International trade was expanding. New fortunes were appearing, and royal courts were connected through an increasingly international network. Cartier's opportunity was bigger than Paris. It was global. The Cartier family understood that different markets had different tastes, and instead of treating those differences as obstacles, they treated them as inspiration. The family eventually established 3 major centers: Paris, London, New York. Each city became part of the Cartier story, and London would become especially important. In 1902, Cartier opened its first London boutique under Pierre Cartier. In 1904, the Maison received its first warrant as an official supplier to the court of King Edward VII. That was a major moment, because a royal warrant wasn't simply another customer relationship. It was an endorsement from the highest levels of society, and Cartier now had something incredibly powerful: credibility. The brand could say, in effect, this isn't merely jewelry for wealthy people, this is jewelry suitable for a king, and that distinction changes everything. Here's the fascinating thing about royalty. Royal jewelry isn't simply about beauty, it carries history. A tiara may be worn at a state occasion. A necklace may be passed from one generation to another. A brooch may be connected to a marriage. A gemstone may have belonged to a monarch decades earlier. So when a jeweler creates something for a royal client, the object can become part of history. Cartier understood this. The Maison's historical collection contains numerous pieces connected with royal clients. For example, a Cartier tiara created in 1910 was sold to Elizabeth, Queen of the Belgians. Another Cartier tiara from 1914 combined platinum, diamonds, natural pearls, onyx, and enamel in an early Art Deco style. These aren't simply expensive objects, they're historical documents made from precious materials. And this is where Cartier's relationship with royalty became so valuable. Every royal commission could become part of the brand's mythology. Every photograph of a royal wearing Cartier created another layer of association. And every generation that saw those images learned the same lesson. Cartier belongs in the world of extraordinary people. But Cartier's vision of luxury was never limited to Europe. One of its most fascinating chapters unfolded in India. In 1911, Jacques Cartier travelled to India from the London branch. He wanted to explore the pearl market, meet suppliers, and develop relationships with clients and maharajas. India offered Cartier something extraordinary: a different jewelry tradition, different colours, different gemstones, different ways of wearing jewelry, and enormous collections of royal jewels. Cartier absorbed these influences. The result would eventually become one of the Maison's most distinctive styles: tutti frutti. Emeralds, rubies, sapphires, carved into leaves, berries, and flowers. Rather than hiding the individuality of each gemstone, Cartier celebrated colour. The Maison describes tutti frutti as an emblematic style that emerged in the 1920s after Jacques Cartier's exposure to Indian jewellery and craftsmanship. This is one of the secrets behind Cartier. The company didn't simply export French jewelry to the rest of the world. It absorbed the world into Cartier. Russian influences, Indian influences, Middle Eastern influences, Asian influences, European traditions. Then Cartier transformed those influences into its own design language. That made the brand feel international without losing its identity. Now imagine receiving an extraordinary commission. Not a necklace you can buy from a display case. Not a piece designed for mass production, but something created for a ruler. In 1928, Cartier created an extraordinary ceremonial necklace for Maharaja Sir Bhupinder Singh of Patiala. The piece contained 2,930 diamonds and weighed a total of approximately 1,000 carats. Cartier describes it as the largest necklace ever made by the Maison. Think about what that means. Thousands of diamonds, an enormous quantity of precious material, complex craftsmanship, and a client whose position demanded something far beyond ordinary luxury. This is where Cartier's relationship with royalty becomes more than a marketing story. The jewelry itself became a form of spectacle. A royal jewel doesn't simply say, "This person is rich." It says, "This person belongs to a world of power." And Cartier became one of the companies capable of manufacturing that visual language. But here's where Cartier separated itself from simply being a gemstone dealer. Because diamonds alone don't create Cartier. You can have a magnificent diamond, but if you put it into an ordinary setting, you have an expensive stone. Cartier's real power was design. The Maison developed a distinctive visual vocabulary: platinum, clean lines, geometric forms, color contrasts, natural motifs, animals, flowers, architecture, and eventually some of the most recognizable jewelry designs in the world. This ability to turn materials into recognizable shapes became one of Cartier's greatest advantages. The company wasn't just asking, "What gemstones do we have?" It was asking, "What can these gemstones become?" And that difference is enormous. Then came one of Cartier's most famous symbols, the panthère. A panther, elegant, powerful, dangerous, beautiful. It was an extraordinary choice for a jewelry house, because a diamond necklace can represent wealth, but an animal can represent personality. The panthère became one of Cartier's most recognizable motifs, and it demonstrated another principle that would become central to luxury branding. A powerful symbol can become more valuable than a product. Once people recognize the shape, they don't need to see the name. They know, this is Cartier. That's the same reason certain logos, patterns, and silhouettes become incredibly powerful in fashion. They create instant recognition, and recognition reduces the need for explanation. The product can speak for itself. Cartier eventually moved beyond traditional high jewelry into objects that were more modern, architectural, and sometimes surprisingly minimal. Consider the love bracelet. Created in New York in 1969, it became one of Cartier's most recognizable jewelry designs. Its signature feature is the series of screws integrated into the bracelet structure, accompanied by a dedicated screwdriver used to open and close it. That design is fascinating, because the screws aren't hidden, they're visible, and instead of being treated as a technical necessity, they became part of the aesthetic. The object essentially says, the mechanism is the design. That's clever, and it shows how Cartier could transform something functional into a symbol. The love bracelet isn't merely about precious metal, it is about an idea, commitment. The bracelet is designed to remain closed around the wrist once secured. That physical characteristic became part of its emotional story, and suddenly, a piece of metal became a symbol of love. This is the same transformation we saw with Rolex. A functional object becomes a cultural object. But Cartier does it through jewelry. And then there is another Cartier icon, the tank watch. Created by Louis Cartier, the tank was inspired by the shape of military tanks during World War I. Its distinctive rectangular architecture and vertical brancards gave it a radically different appearance from the traditional round watch. Again, Cartier was doing something unusual. It wasn't simply making a watch, it was making a design statement. The tank demonstrates an important part of Cartier's identity. The Maison sits at the intersection of jewelry, watchmaking, and design. And that makes Cartier unusual. A traditional jeweler might focus almost entirely on gemstones. A traditional watchmaker might focus almost entirely on mechanical engineering. Cartier has spent generations operating between these worlds, and that allows it to sell something broader, not simply a jewel, not simply a watch, but design with history attached to it. Now we can return to the question, why is Cartier jewelry so expensive? The first answer is obvious. Materials: gold, platinum, diamonds, emeralds, rubies, sapphires, and rare gemstones. But materials alone don't explain the price, because Cartier isn't selling raw materials, it's selling the transformation of those materials into something recognizable. You're paying for design, craftsmanship, gemstone selection, setting, proportion, finishing, quality control, heritage, distribution, and once again, brand value. But Cartier has another advantage. Its history isn't simply written in company brochures, it exists in objects. A Cartier tiara can survive its original owner, a necklace can survive a political era, a watch can survive its designer, a bracelet can pass from one generation to another. The object becomes an archive, and that creates something powerful. Provenance. There is also a fascinating psychological mechanism at work. Imagine two necklaces. One is made beautifully by an unknown jeweler. The other carries the Cartier name. The physical quality might be comparable, but the second object comes with something the first doesn't automatically possess. Context. Who made it? Where was it made? Who has worn it? How long has the company existed? What designs came before it? Which historical figures were connected to the Maison? What does the name mean? This is why luxury is fundamentally different from ordinary manufacturing. A luxury company doesn't simply create an object, it creates context around the object. And Cartier has had more than a century to build that context. The royal connection helped enormously, but it wasn't the only reason. Cartier's design innovations reinforced the reputation. Its international expansion reinforced it. Its craftsmanship reinforced it. Its relationship with gemstones reinforced it. Its watches reinforced it. Its recognizable motifs reinforced it. Each generation added another layer. And this is where the Cartier story becomes even more interesting, because royalty changed, the world changed. The 20th century transformed politics, society, and fashion. But Cartier survived. The brand expanded beyond royal courts into a much broader cultural world. Celebrities, artists, entrepreneurs, collectors, design enthusiasts, and ordinary people who simply wanted a piece of that history. That transformation was essential, because a luxury brand cannot survive forever by depending on kings. It has to make itself relevant to new generations. Cartier achieved this by turning historical designs into contemporary icons. The Panthère, Love, Just Un Clou, Tank, Santos. These collections allow the brand to connect its historical identity with modern consumers. The result is unusual. Cartier can feel ancient and modern at exactly the same time. So, how did Cartier become the jeweler of royalty? It wasn't simply because Cartier had access to diamonds. Other jewelers had diamonds. It wasn't simply because Cartier had talented craftsmen. Other jewelers had craftsmen. It wasn't even simply because Cartier had wealthy clients. Other jewelers had wealthy clients. Cartier combined something more difficult. Craftsmanship plus designs, relationships, international visions, storytelling. And then it built a recognizable identity around all of them. The royal connection gave Cartier prestige. The gemstones gave it material richness. The designers gave it visual identity. The artisans gave it technical credibility. The international network gave it scale. And time gave everything else meaning. Think about a Cartier piece today. You may see a diamond, a ruby, a sapphire, a piece of gold, a watch, a bracelet. But underneath that physical object is a much longer story. A Paris workshop founded in 1847, a family that expanded across continents, a London boutique that entered the orbit of the royal court, a relationship with maharajas and gemstone traditions, a design language shaped by cultures around the world, a panther that became a symbol, a bracelet that turned screws into decoration, a watch that transformed military inspiration into timeless design, and generations of artisans who turned raw materials into objects that could survive for centuries. That is what Cartier really sells. Not simply jewelry, continuity. Because when someone buys a Cartier piece, they aren't only buying something made today, they are buying a connection to everything that came before it. And perhaps that's why royalty mattered so much. Royalty gave jewelry something most products can never achieve, a visible relationship with history. A crown eventually disappears, A kingdom can fall, a fashion trend can vanish, but a jewel can survive. It can move from one generation to another, and every new owner adds another chapter to its story. That may be the greatest power of Cartier. The company doesn't just make beautiful objects, it makes objects capable of carrying stories through time. And that is why Cartier became more than a jeweler. It became a name associated with royalty, with power, with love, with design, with craftsmanship, and with the idea that some objects are meant to outlive the people who first owned them. So the next time you see a Cartier bracelet, a tank watch, a panthère, or a diamond necklace, don't just look at the price, look at the history inside it. Because the real luxury isn't the gold, it isn't the diamond. It isn't even the name, it's the story that the name has